Welcome to OpenStack New York, October 8th, 2013, in the heart of Sin City, New York. I'd like to introduce Rob Hirschfeld, Distinguished Principal Engineer. Is that how it goes?
Yes,
at Dell. He's also the founder of the Crowbar project and OpenStack board member pretty much since its inception, or at least for the past year.
I've been doing OpenStack since day one.
Very close colleague of mine, architect of the Crowbar solution, but we're here to talk about OpenStack and what the core of OpenStack is and the ideas associated around it, and perhaps how they are similar or different from other foundations and other large open source projects that are alive today. So, Rob Hirschfeld.
Wow, thank you. Hey, everybody. So one of the things I love to do is I love to encourage people to do a active back channel and bring questions and stuff into the back channel. If somebody can links in the video, we'll do a front-facing feed for it. Right now it's you for the feed, but there's nobody else in it, so don't be shy. So yeah, Jud did a good job giving me background. I've been in OpenStack. I'm not sure I need the microphone for this small bit. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
That's better. So I've been doing OpenStack since it's very early days. I've been in cloud actually I was just meeting up with a buddy of mine for 15 years. I've been doing cloud for 15 years. And so I have a good background with this. I got elected to the board. I work for Dell, but I represent community on the board. So of the board composition, how many of you know anything about or are interested in OpenStack politics and the board side of it, or is it just one about tech? This meeting is the exciting intersection of both. I'm a technologist, but my role is to represent the community on the board, and so it's really important for me to hear your opinions back. Right? We make a big effort, especially on topics as important as what defines OpenStack core, to test these ideas, get feedback about what makes sense and if not. And so, the board has 24 members on it. 12 of them are platinum members. They're effectively, they were very early adopters of OpenStack, foundational members, if you will. And they serve, those positions are locked on the board. There's a gold membership level that has 12 seats on the board, although there are only up to 24 gold members. Right now there's 16, so we have 8 open slots left. I suspect those will be filled by the end of 2014. There's a lot of interest in people being that. And of those 24, they elect 8 people to be on the board. And then the remaining 8 seats are elected by the OpenStack community. So if you are a registered member of OpenStack, you get to vote the upcoming board membership elections. And so it's my job specifically, and 7 other people, to represent what the community's needs are and trying to separate ourselves from the business drivers for OpenStack. So with that sort of preamble, the board doesn't do that much in most people's opinions. What our job is to sort of oversee that the foundation is running correctly. Right? The foundation actually collects a lot of money. They run summits. They help organize events like this. They help organize training. They do a lot of marketing. They control what OpenStack, how OpenStack is presented in the world. And so it's our job to oversee their operations, right? The operations of the foundation. A lot of the technical decisions are made by a technical committee that picks which projects are incubated, so which things come in, decides the technical leadership of the program. That's actually voted by contributors. And then there's a user committee, and it probably just missed the deadline if you haven't. The user committee collects a lot of information about who's doing what with OpenStack, and they take surveys, and their job is to represent the operators and the users of OpenStack. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of pieces. One of the few things the board really actively needs to do is protect the OpenStack brand. So it's our job to define what OpenStack is. Right? The technical committee can bring in all these new exciting projects and get a lot of innovation and incubate new projects and make it part of the integrated release of OpenStack. The board's job is to figure out, of all that exciting innovation, which things are the core components which are required. So far that makes sense. When OpenStack was founded, right, so OpenStack has been a going concern for a while under Rackspace's governance. When the board, when the foundation was set up about 18 months ago, what happened is that we decided, the decision was just take basically every active project and make that core. So that included core fundamental things like Nova for compute, or what it's called Quantum for networking, Horizon, which is the dashboard interface, Cinder, which is the block storage interface, Glance, Keystone for authenticating all these projects, right? Hopefully, does everybody know the code names? Yes. How many people aren't familiar? If I said Keystone, they wouldn't know specifically what it was. It's fine. All right. Go back up a little bit and try to explain this. So, and what I'll do, what I will do is I will switch. There's two sets of names. I'll use the logical names, not the project names. So authentication, compute, storage, networking, right? And inside the community, we tend to use these very confusing code names, and it's a barrier to entry. We're actually trying to get people to start using the descriptive names a little bit more, and things easier. So if you're coming into OpenStack, the first thing most people experience with OpenStack is this overwhelming feeling that, oh my God, there's 20 different projects. I don't know which ones to use. I don't know which ones are important. I don't know how to set it up. There's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about OpenStack, which we love, but there's also a lot of activity and there's a lot of confusion, and it's not sure what's required and what's not. So when I talk to people trying to set up OpenStack, they're like, well, do I have to use the object store system if I just want to do a VMware replacement? No, you don't. Right? You can use these different bits and pieces, but some things you actually have to use. So the authentication piece is central to everything, and you have to use that because it drives how things get authenticated. The thing that makes it a little bit confusing is that we have some major sites like Rackspace that don't use the authentication module of OpenStack. How do they do that? They do it because they can represent the API that does the authentication and have everything work without actually having to implement the authentication, which is called Keystone, in the project. So because OpenStack is by design is interlocked projects, it's actually possible to operate OpenStack without some pieces and to actually replace some pieces. So far that makes sense? And that opens up this huge question. Well, some of OpenStack is required, some isn't required. What do I actually have to do to use OpenStack? Or from a commercial perspective, what do I have to do if I'm going to sell a product that says it's OpenStack? How do I know that I can use the name OpenStack for a product like this? I mean, my company Dell, we have a project called Crowbar. We deploy OpenStack on top of it. We actually use everything. We don't use everything that's in OpenStack. We use certain core, what we consider core pieces, and don't have other pieces that are still emerging in the project. There's other companies that only sell. There's like SwiftStack, which focuses on selling Swift. There's a ton of different people in the market that deploy different capabilities within OpenStack. And the challenge is they all want to say, I am OpenStack. And since everything's a little bit different, it's not clear what those things are. So do people understand why that's important? Do people understand why that's a very political statement? Because if I'm telling you something you thought was important isn't, right? I've had very passionate conversations with people who said OpenStack, an orchestration component called Heat, is absolutely essential, critical, required piece of OpenStack that must be considered part of core. And I will walk down the hall and talk to somebody else and they're like, I don't care about Heat, your way out there. It's same, right? And people are very passionate about these things and what it means and all that. So what's been going on for us is that by not deciding what it's for, we actually create problems for the OpenStack community in what they need to adopt, what they need to implement. If somebody tries to sell a product that's OpenStack and it doesn't work right, then how do we enforce that that's not OpenStack and say it's a trademark violation? If somebody rewrites OpenStack in Java, which there are people doing, and implements all the APIs faithfully, and they say they're an OpenStack cloud, right? Those are really significant questions for what that trademark means, right? Because they could say they're an OpenStack cloud and then not be a very good implementation and cause a lot of confusion in the market. And so fundamentally, the only real stick, one of the few sticks that the foundation and the board have to make sure that OpenStack means something useful, that is providing useful value, is by making sure the trademark and the brand use it. So that's what defining OpenStack is about. Makes sense. I don't want to spend a lot more time. I'd rather spend time talking about what we're doing, but I want to give you the background so that it makes sense. I also don't want to bore you guys too much. It's one of those things where it's been, for me, it's been a 12-month process. We still have another 12 months to go before we see this stuff implemented. So it's very, we have to make very careful decisions. We have to do it as quickly as we can from the board perspective. That's hard.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So is the fight right now to try to keep all of those modules, components as core, or are there things that are kind of getting ready to fall out?
I love that question. So there's a whole bunch of new things that are coming into OpenStack, incubated projects, and that want to be considered part of OpenStack. And this is what's confusing. There's an OpenStack core are considered the essential components that you must use. There's a lot of things that are in OpenStack integrated releases that are optional, and there's nothing wrong with being an integrated project that's not a core project. There's a lot of psychological baggage. Part of the reason why we have to do what we're going to walk through is that we need to be able to say, look, this is an absolute requirement. If somebody says, I'm running OpenStack, you expect this to be here. But it's okay if they add other things, right? If we get a new project, like load balancer as a service is an incubated project this time of year, where there's a database as a service, all these new exciting capabilities. Some of those things are probably core required in OpenStack. Some of them are just things that are part of the OpenStack community. And so they can be in OpenStack, but still not be core. I don't know if does that answer your question?
That does make sense.
It's a very psychologically powerful problem because we have projects like Horizon that I hear very strongly from people. They don't think it should be in core because there's a lot of people who don't use it, right? No public service provider of OpenStack uses Horizon. It's strictly used by proof of concept, smaller clouds, people who can't write their UI for it. So there's a pretty strong argument that Horizon shouldn't be in core. Well, the Horizon team would probably not they don't necessarily want to lose the designation that they're core because they feel that it makes them more important. Right? It's like Starbucks niche thing. This is the trick, and part of what we're doing here hopefully will help define what core means. In a lot of cases, we've had these discussions, and people afterwards are like, you know what, being core is going to sort of suck, because that means that I have to be more resilient. I can't change as fast. I can't take into innovation. I can't, I have more people depending on me, and so it's much harder for a core project to change, while a non-core integrated project could actually make much more sweeping changes because they're only going to affect a smaller user base. So we're trying to help people figure all those things out. In the Linux community, right, userland stuff is very adaptive and moving really quick, and that stuff changes pretty quickly because it's user space. Kernel is a much higher hurdle to achieve, and it's going to have to be tested and put through a lot more rigor. It's the same, it's similar but not identical. That's been one of the things I'm trying to make sure people are going through. And then there's a couple of pieces that are worth staging with this first. One is, in my role with this might be confusing. I actually, my job here is not to force my opinion on this. If you push me really hard, I'll tell you my opinions. But my job here is to actually reflect a lot of people's opinions. So if I'm doing a good job, you will actually hear me make contradictory statements because I'm trying to represent the different opinions I've heard in the community. And that's it. So what I want everybody here to do, especially with fresh perspectives, is pressure test this. Right? We want to make sure that when this stuff, when we're implementing this, that people have thought it through, that we haven't missed some crazy explosion that makes things really hard. And then the other thing that is really important to me is that we pressure test this against cultural behavior. So one of the things that I'm really careful about, and I listen to very carefully in the discussions, I like to encourage everybody to think about, is we want to make sure that our core definition drives people to participate in OpenStack as members, it drives people to write good code for OpenStack, that extends the community in a positive way. Right? So we try to be very careful that defining core, we don't make somebody say, well, I'm not core anymore, I'm going to pack up my bags and leave the community. Or that if they, that there's a lot of ambivalence or fighting about what's going on, we don't want those things to happen. We want it to be much more, we like passion, we don't want people to fork OpenStack, right? Which is one of the things that's been, from OpenStack's perspective, my perspective as a board member, the most dangerous thing that OpenStack faces and will face is people taking a copy of the code and then making their own version. And so we really want to encourage people using OpenStack, people innovating on top of OpenStack, to keep those ideas back into OpenStack. And so I'll ask you, every time we talk about something, especially controversial, think to yourself, does this encourage people to come back into the community and stay in the community, or does it discourage them?
So, just out of curiosity, how much do you see of that, of companies contributing back versus taking their own distribution, running with it, not
It's a really remarkable thing. I see a lot more upstreaming and sharing putting code back in, and I see incredible pressure in the community to do exactly that. It comes and goes a little bit, and different companies have different policies on it and the way they approach it. But the pressure to take these things and keep them in upstream is very high. A lot of times when we engage with customers who want to do custom OpenStack or open source work, what we hear from them is, okay, we'll pay to do consulting, but we don't want it to be custom. We want to make sure that the work you do with us goes back into the community. And it's actually over the last couple of years been a real sea change in how companies approach open source projects.
So just to bring something recent to the discussion, there's a little tab for HP and Dell about HP's version of OpenStack on the OpenStack.
Yes, I mean, we put a huge amount of pressure on them. I would say that goes back about 2 years. But I think it's calmed down because they've done a really good job of remedying that situation. The Boston Summit, my boss at the time, I went to Rackspace, got up on stage and without naming any particular vendor, but made a very plain statement: don't fork it up, right? Don't fork, keep your stuff going. Because at the time, there had been a lot of code done that was not being contributed back. And so we put, very, very deliberately put a lot of pressure on other vendors at that point to not reinforce the OpenStack.
When you say we, talking Dell or you're talking about OpenStack?
Dell did it specifically in the instance we're talking about here, but the OpenStack Foundation, the board members, the other companies, the member companies really come back and help drive that. And it's not just the board, it's a community thing. So, when we talk to new gold members, that's what we're asking: what are you contributing back? What are you doing? And some of that comes back to something as subtle as positioning in your product in the market, positioning in what types of work you do in the community, how broadly you have a perspective on it. And so we try to be very, very sensitive.
I'm a cloud architect at Meetup, and the pressure was we were against some money. and internal as well. People really want those units coming back. And we're so product focused and we learned a lot that we got more and more from the core products. And there's a huge effort in right now to make sure that everything gets submitted out. You can see little reminders about, hey, I haven't seen it from you or you. We took getting back to jobs so seriously that we actually just stood up a brand new environment, leaving our old environment behind to get up to the
The reason I bring it up is as a prospective user and not looking under the hood of what's going on technically, it's a lot of fear and certainly now when things start to wander off the reference implementation.
And we're working very hard for that. That's one of the reasons why the core discussion is important. Actually, I love that seeing HP, hearing that is exactly what we want to see. And the fact that HP is doing it to make statements like that trust everybody. It's very easy to customize and say, oh, this is my proprietary special advantage, but we really want to make sure that we don't create an environment where that's happening.
How much of OpenStack is driven by the need to be compatible with AWS?
There's been quite a brouhaha sponsored and led by Randy Bias about this discussion specifically. Different people have very different opinions on this. And the core definition work, I believe, has a way of addressing that concern.
Whether it's a yes or no. Are they going to say our mandate is to be always compatible with AWS or?
So OpenStack has its own APIs. They are public and they are unencumbered, meaning that you can implement the OpenStack APIs and be an OpenStack cloud, not worry about anybody suing. Amazon APIs are not quite as clear cut from that perspective, and they're not publicly discussed. You don't have the avenue to dispute it. So the best we could do is we could have a compatibility statement that would be true at some point. I think you'll see our goal with the core definition is to be based on what is valuable to the users. It's the ultimate test, and if the users find that AWS API is really valuable, then that's great. We should implement them as close as we can. I doubt Rackspace or HP are going to stand up the AWS APIs as the primary. Yes, so it's an interesting discussion. I feel like the purpose of having a process for knowing what's core and not core helps us take the wind out of that. As I like the expression, we take the sails out of that wind. But there's no doubt, Amazon APIs are really important to the user. I don't know that we sync it first and make it without. Other questions? I'm about to tell you what the process is with this. And I would encourage you to go back. I've actually done, I think I've got to almost 12,000 words of background information, why all this stuff, and how we went through the process. I'm going to jump into this chart, which helps define all this stuff. I'm going to check the video for a second. That's easy. Okay. Can everybody see that? It's huge. So I'm going to stay close. So here's what we ended up with. This is a flow chart. I'm going to try and go through this. What I'll ask is let me go through all the way through it, and then what I'd like to do is take individual points, we can test them, ask questions, things like that. And it's helpful if I go all the way through the cycle. So there's a couple of interesting things that drive a lot of conversation. So we start in the top left with the basic. I think see where I can copy. We start in the top left, and where we're talking about implementation. So this is what I said, right? There are implementations. The definition core means something very specific. You can use the OpenStack trademark with your implementation. And the goal of what we're saying is everything in OpenStack is not core, just some of OpenStack. And the question is how much or what. And it's important that the core definition is not different for different usage models. So if you have a private cloud, or you're a component of somebody else's broader application, or you're a public cloud, or you have some use case that we haven't considered yet, if you say you are OpenStack, especially OpenStack core, you're OpenStack core. There's no if or maybe, right? And that's important because one of the things that we're really trying to drive is interoperability. So if we had a different standard for public clouds than private clouds, then you couldn't interoperate across those two boundaries, right? Or if we had giant public clouds versus small private clouds is different than public clouds. We get messy. So we're trying to come up with something that works for everybody. So that's sort of the definitional pieces. The technical implementations here are that we're required to use certain designated frameworks. So this is really interesting. So what we're saying is if you want to be OpenStack core, there are parts of the OpenStack project that you are required to use. And the actual code must be used to claim your OpenStack core. Not all of it, but there's the technical needs will say, hey, this is required, a required piece. You must use this part of the code. And then from that, there will be an open source implementation of that code. So a completely open source reference implementation of every piece of OpenStack functionality. So a really good example of this is the compute section. You can implement an OpenStack cloud using only open source technologies, right? KVM, or Zen, or a Docker, or something like that as the background hypervisor. But you could also substitute the implementation and use Zen Server, or Hyper-V, or VMware, or there's other options. So a lot of people would call that pluggable. When we were talking about this, we actually tried to abstract that concept back a little bit. So the idea is that we have a required piece of code, we have an open source reference implementation, and then people can substitute out and change things if they want. A really good example of doing this are the block storage called Cinder, or the networking piece called Neutron. Those we can actually replace the networking or block storage interfaces with different implementations. The most prevalent for the networking used to be from a company called Nicira that was acquired by VMware. And one of the interesting things in the history here is that the first version of Neutron, called Quantum, didn't work fully functional without using a commercial product, which made a lot of people very nervous. So one of the things that we're trying to make sure we have here, if you want something in OpenStack, you might need to buy products to get scale or performance or some added features or benefits, but you should never be able to say, here's a core feature of OpenStack that I can't implement without paying money for a proprietary product. Without a proprietary product. Doesn't matter whether you So the idea is that we want to allow people to innovate and add proprietary extensions and grow the project and be innovative, but we also want to make sure that that the base features there don't get ahead of what the users are. So that's the technical piece. Then from there, we get into how to test it. And so what we expect, and OpenStack is a very active test community, very aggressively tested product using a project called Tempest. It runs in a continuous integration cycle, and we meet our goals. We do a whole bunch of work to make sure that code quality in OpenStack is very high. And so we have an expectation that things in core will be verified by open community tests. So if somebody says, I think this should be in core, we expect there to be a test that validates that it's there. And this is where we're going. That you can administer those tests by yourself or remotely. So if you are HP's cloud, they can go and say, hey, test my cloud, tell me if it's in compliance. If you're a private cloud, you can self-administer that and see if your code complies, your implementation complies. And then from that set of tests, the foundation is going to choose a body of them that must pass. So we've got over 700 tests in the current release that may or may not pass depending on implementation details or functionality or how you make configuration choices. Of those, some subset we think must be labeled or would be labeled as must-pass tests. Those must-pass tests define core. So if you can set up your OpenStack implementation, use the designated code frameworks, you can substitute in whatever pieces you want. If you can pass all the must-pass tests, you can say that you are an OpenStack core project, or OpenStack core implementation. You use the framework. So it says, if you don't pass all the must-pass tests, you wouldn't be able to be defined as core. You wouldn't be able to use the framework. That's the whole circuit.
So that means OpenStack is more of a standard than actually code-based.
No. This is really, and this is actually why that middle point, I should put numbers back on this. That's why the requiring code frameworks is in there. It is not.
Sure, but there's no one kernel code base that others plug in.
The way this definition is written, and it's written very intentionally like this, not everybody agrees with this, is that if you want to claim that you are OpenStack, you must use the required components of the infrastructure. Okay? You cannot pass the tests and claim you are OpenStack if you haven't implemented the OpenStack code. That is, and the reason why this is very important to some people in the community is that if you don't do this, then people they basically create API compliance that might not actually interoperate, and then they also aren't encouraged to contribute back to the community. So it becomes very important that, all right, if I'm going to use, maybe the authentication model can be backended with Kerberos or LDAP or my hand checking off names as people log in. That's fine, but if you're not using the overall Keystone infrastructure, then you have no incentive to actually make that better. And so there's some very active people in the community who are worried that if we don't require people to contribute back into the code, we encourage forking, we lose the upstreaming.
Seems based on requirement, you like LGPL might have choices of license. That's very positive.
Yeah, that's a very political one. Apache, and this is really a really fascinating thing to me. From my perspective, we're taking Apache and we're creating all these cultural and trademark items that effectively make it very GPL-like without making it GPL. So that way, if somebody wants, they can fork it, and they just won't be able to claim trademark. Now, if they do that and that doesn't bother them, then the board is safe. If we've diluted the OpenStack trademark to the point where it doesn't have power to make somebody come back in, we have a problem.
Liberty does the same thing. You accept like CentOS is a fork of ROGL. They have to do everything that performance to Red Hat. They use trademark to stop them from saying that it's Red Hat based on Red Hat.
Right. But because it's GPL, they have to contribute back.
Yeah,
So this was balancing it. I think Apache's a good license for us, but we culturally are trying to encourage non-fork rather than good question.
So I asked this question before, and I gave me an answer, but I don't know if it was the answer that I was looking for. So at this point in time, based on your best hard knowledge, what's trending for us?
What's trending core and what's not?
So what do you think is firmly in the core and versus not?
So I don't have a good answer for you on that.
You can take a pretty good stab.
I think
any of us can take a good stab. What do you think that might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking at things like the compute project, a network project, block project, authentication, definitely all makes sense. The thing that's really interesting with this is because we're talking about tests which are much more granular, it's not even a matter of whether compute is all in or is in or not. We actually, I think, we're going to end up looking at the compute project and seeing only about half of the tests that compute implements as core. And so one of the things that people get to in these discussions is they start thinking, okay, wait a second, it's not even whether Nova is all the way in or not, which I'm assuming one test would make you a core project, but which tests in Nova are core or not core. Because really, if I'm trying to interoperate between two clouds, that's what I care about. In a sense, what HP and Rackspace care about is not whether or not somebody finds an edge case where they're different. What they want to know is that they overlap in the places that the community needs them to overlap. So it's about Venn diagrams. And so it's a really good question.
That's a really good answer, actually. I thought that was good. That makes sense.
And this is what, to me, is the sort of the escape hatch from the boxing matches we were having about what is core. Because the question stops being, is Nova core? It becomes, is this use case for Nova a core use case or not? And those usually fall into clearly yes, clearly no, and then let's fight about it. But that's, if I can get that subset down into just a third, it's sort of thing.
So, what in this diagram if I want to be a project but not a core project, so obviously I don't have to pass these selective must-pass tests. But what about all the other ones? Don't I have to do that anyway, or?
So one of the things that we want to do is we want the integrated projects to be aggressively writing tests. Because in some ways, the only way they could ever become core is if they have tests that people pass. But no, you don't. Integrated projects there's a technical vetting process by which the integrated projects come into it, and that's driven by the technical committees, and they're bringing in membership. They're effectively, it can be incubated, they go through an incubation candidate phase, and then they get integrated into the release. It's actually a multi-release cycle. And from that perspective, they can come through that process all they want and not ever touch core. Interestingly, they are very motivated by these tests in a lot of ways because they depend on infrastructure to be in a certain way. So if I'm using database as a service or keys, which is the orchestration pieces, those actually depend on the other APIs for the core projects. And so if the core projects are not in compliance, then they end up in trouble. Right? So it sort of ends up being wrong. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess what I was wondering is if I want to be a project in OpenStack, don't I have to not depend on proprietary software and that kind of thing?
So, yes and no. So, if you were, let's say you had a great technology. I'll think you've done it. That's dynamic load balance, dynamic DNS infrastructure. DNS is a core piece of what OpenStack's got to do. Let's say Dyn has. They're not that active in the community. But let's say they had this really cool way to do load DNS dynamically in the infrastructure to dramatically improve load balance. It would be great to have that in the project. What they would need to do is build an open source reference architecture that exposed the functionality and had an alternate implementation. So they might say, I want dynamic DNS, and here's a really simple way to do it, and they put that in the community as an open source thing. And then they make it pluggable, and then they say, well, but you can plug in our capability with that. The Cinder pieces work a lot that way, so there's a whole bunch of ways to store data, right? NetApp does it with file server. A whole bunch of companies do it with block storage devices. There's some projects where there's also there's a very clear spot in code where you can swap out one implementation for a different implementation. And the company that actually drove Cinder work was SolidFire. SolidFire definitely has a product, definitely wants to monetize it. They definitely have proprietary pieces that you can buy. But the core working version of Cinder just uses a regular block storage device, just had a regular disk in the back end, and it works. So, long-winded answer, but they provided a reference implementation, and then you can swap it and use the SolidFire package if you want it. And that allows them to have all the source story Great question. We want to encourage that behavior. What we don't want to have happen when we're doing this, the Neutron PTL was pretty vocal about this. We really let Nicira drive some great innovation into Neutron, but then since you had to use Nicira to unlock a lot of the features that we wanted, it made it very hard for other people to come in and they couldn't baseline without Nicira. And then you've got things like, well, I can't take your pull requests and it doesn't take it. What happens is that people can't add to the code base because they don't know what's going to bring it out, right? Because there's features that they don't get fast. So we try to be very careful. Does this seem to answer that? Do you have a question? Does this make sense to people? It's a little radical in that it is very test-driven. One of the things that I love test-driven development, and I think that's really important, especially for an open source project. But one of the consequences here that passes my test is that we're driving towards making OpenStack the most tested infrastructure service anywhere. Right? And then if you want to make sure, if you want to run a cloud infrastructure, the fact that we are actually building tests into our core definition of culture is something that sets us apart from anybody else. Right? It allows you to have a degree of confidence in whether or not your cloud works that you can't get to anywhere else. You have to build this into the actual methodology by which you wrote.
So what happens if something is accepted to the core, then who maintains it? Is the company that contributed it, or is it taken over by core company?
So we've done a really good job, I think, having a diverse set of contributors in these projects, especially by the time they make it out of the incubated stage. A lot of times, the incubated project will have one corporate owner, and by the time they've made it out of that stage, they usually have multiple contributors and actually a pretty diverse set of entities participating. Every project I can think of started with one key owner. A really good example is Smaller, where Ubuntu showed a lot of leadership. Smaller is the leader in the ops, so it actually comes in and helps you figure out who's using how much capacity in your system. Ubuntu showed a lot of leadership in doing that, he picked up that project in a big way, and they helped do it. They started breaking pieces out, and they were refactoring it. So those types of changes were really part of how the community operates. And it's very hard to make a project go even get incubated without showing multiple parties, and definitely to get to the next level up. We've had a really good history, not that old, but I've watched in a lot of cases the technical leads for these projects have actually been rotating out and switching companies. So the PTLs for most of the core projects, say core, right? So things like Nova and Quantum. I don't think we've had John move off of Cinder yet, but I'm sure that'll happen soon. They've actually rotated out and got new people to come in and take over the project, usually from new companies. It's one of those health measures that's really worth watching.
Well, thanks for telling me.
Great question. I'm not watching the time, so. Other questions?
Yeah, so there's, in all of this, there's most of the chart is just good coding practice. And then you have,
I'm glad you think so. Good.
and then the two orange boxes on the side are kind of more where the gotchas are, where it's a little more subjective.
Yes.
So what are the must-pass test cases? So I think that's where people might start to get rubbed the wrong way in those.
So this is, you're jumping to implementation, which is a really good question. So what we're driving towards is in November for the board to decide this is the way we want to handle core definition. And then the next question after that becomes, well, how do we figure out what must-pass tests are? Which will be more contentious, right? And here's what I've been trying to help people think through. Is OpenStack culturally is an implementation-driven project. So this is really worth understanding, especially for people who are really OpenStack. You will not see OpenStack leadership sit down with a committee and design an API and say, we think the API should look like this, and then hand that off to the people to go implement, and then hope it turns out well. OpenStack is an implementation-driven project, right? So what we do typically is we write code, we implement an API as best we think, we show the code to other people, we show the APIs to other people, they bang on it, and we evolve the project through its implementation. And that's culturally a very important thing. If you look at the chart, go back in history on this, you'll actually see implementation versus API as one of the key tensions in OpenStack. Right? We want a stable API, but we want to be implementation-led. And that's actually a tricky balance. I believe what we can do with the tests is take the same approach. So the must-pass test should not be designed by a committee in a room during a summit. The must-pass test should be driven by which tests are passing in sites, right? And so one of the things that we want to do for the must-pass test is actually collect data from individual sites and public clouds and private clouds and vendors' products, where we actually collect the data that says, okay, in 60% of field cases, this test passes. And that's an indication for would pass. That's an indication that that test is driving a use case that the community cares about. But what I don't want to have us do is have the board sit around the table counting, I think this test is a must-pass test because my company implements this function. We're trying to get out of that. So we want to be, just like code is implementation code, we want to use what the customers, what the users and operators actually do influence which tests we pass must pass. And I think that makes it much less subjective. And then we can actually use like the user committee, whose job is to pull its data, and use them as the advocate for which tests we must pass. One of the consequences of this is that I think there are going to be a much smaller set of must-pass tests than people might expect. And that's something that we're going to have to see. It could be of the 1,000 or so tests that are in there, you could have 250 must-pass, and that's it. And then we add them back over time as we gain the data. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. Does that make sense? Does that seem like a practical way to address this?
So, for example, if somebody wants to make load balancing as a service as a core project, right? And then, so they develop it, they say we want to make this core. So does the user community say, okay, they have load balancing as a service. Let me go out and research what users want in a load balancing as a service. Now, these are the tests users must pass. Is that kind of how it's supposed to work?
It's not, I wouldn't say it's that research driven.
Okay.
What we see is none of these projects show up, they don't go from concept to integrated in a day. It actually takes 3 to 5 release cycles. So load balancing as a service is an incubated project. As part of being promoted to an integrated project, it's going to have to pass PPLs, have tests, and all those things. And what even as it's incubated, it's going to start building a user base. And so a project like load balancer, I think load balancer is a really good candidate for a core project. So what that would mean is that you have advanced users who would pick up load balancer as a service, and they start reporting, oh, it passed in our site. And we actually have a trend line that shows, oh, here's test passing, and we're getting 20%, 25%, 30% passing rates on this project release by release. And then it becomes pretty straightforward to say, oh, 50%, this project is a likely set for testing. And that way it becomes, it's not, you should never spring on somebody. Ideally, right, we're going to have time and trend lines, and we're going to look and see which projects are trending up, some projects are trending down. And one of the things I like about this strategy is that it really let us be data-driven in making these decisions. And so you can actually do it like that. Implementing that is a challenge. But it gets me out of the data counting discussion of what's required. And it also, which I like, drives back to, is this component driving value or use cases driving value, or people building these and actually relying on these. Right? Things, the places where the tests are going to pass are pretty good indications of things that people rely on working in order for them to be successful. Sorry.
So if I look at this, it doesn't seem to be so much about what a component does, so much as how it does it. I mean, that's what it appears. Is that actually how it's supposed to work? So, for instance, is this supposed to take the debate out of what a heap is functionality is for? And it's more held up to does it do X, Y, and Z well?
That's a really good question. So I think you and I agree on this. A use case, a test is really a use case of a fair statement. I mean, from my perspective, a good test validates that you're implementing the use case successfully. And so it's supposed to take a lot of friction over whether these use cases are important or not. There's been a lot of discussion that Swift PPL project is actually very vocal on this. There's elements of implementation that you can't take out of the system. Right? Brady Bias will tell you the same thing. One of his big arguments about Amazon API is not, is that the implementation behind the scenes really matters. Just testing the APIs doesn't tell you whether or not your code is going to run with multiple seconds. And so I think that we're not just testing what the API is, but there is an expectation for our test to include how it does it. There will be a degree of implementation tests, and because we expect those to be part of the actual core definition, we can have an expectation that implementations are the implementations are actually portable and referenceable between sites. It's really what we want to be able to do is have the expectation that if you implement OpenStack here and here, or if you take my team's reference implementation of OpenStack, and did it to the cloud, and did it to the cloud the other night, take their implementation of OpenStack, you expect your application deployment and DevOps infrastructure to work equally well against all. I don't know that it will. I haven't tested that, but I do know that if they pass all the Tempest tests, if they actually post the results of Tempest tests on a website called RepStack, and if we pass all the same tests, I would really hope that the tests are good enough that you have confidence. One of the things about that is you need to get over the expectation that any site will pass the 100% test. This actually gives you this alpha. It could be that Hyper-V support that they added 20 tests for the Hyper-V specific to Hyper-V. Broadcom would want that in the community. Anybody who doesn't deploy Hyper-V won't pass those tests. It's okay. And what I want to know is this is actually a lead. This is a question we're not trying to solve yet, but it's really one that we're going to have to. Is that at some point we're going to want to be able to say, well, this subset of tests, I'm thinking Hyper-V at random, but this subset of tests actually is being deployed itself. And at some point the board or OpenStack Foundation is going to have to say, here's an extra batch of tests that you can run to compare sites and segment them into different uses. Usually, when I have this discussion with some people, they jump to that. And like, oh, there's going to end up being an OpenStack for big data, and there's going to be an OpenStack for media companies that have different tests, different sets of tests. That they're a big enough community that they care that they all pass the same set of tests. OpenStack for Hyper-V.
So is there an official distribution of OpenStack versus always regular coded?
No, there is. This is part of what we're trying to address. OpenStack does not do its own building. It has its trunk, and we have a release management process where there's actually a release, and the release is a very specific thing, and then a lot of different people package it. As distributions, Red Hat, Ubuntu, SUSE, I think somebody else just stated package it as its own. And this allows you to say what that is. So, for example, if I'll pick on this tonight, but if they have a version of OpenStack but they don't like the way Neutron is implemented, VMware is an example. Because they want to bring in Sierra. They don't want to ship, they don't need to ship OpenStack as a pure open reference implementation. The distribution would include their pieces. Right? But if they can pass all the must-pass tests with their own pieces and using the parts of OpenStack that are required, rock on, fine. Right? If they can't, and we had this discussion too, let's say they had, I'll give you an example, not a controversial example. So there's a lot of controversy between Swift and Ceph. Right? And so we have people who don't want to use Swift and want to use Ceph as their object store, but it's not an OpenStack project. And so in that case, if Swift was a core project, I would have to ship Swift and be able to pass the tests with Swift, even if I turn it off and then replace it with something else later. You have to do a way for you to go back to the referencing implementation. Whether or not Swift stays in its core is something we're not having. And John, one of the things that John really likes to see is white box tests. A lot of the time it's tests with black box and test the APIs, but it's perfectly reasonable that we have white box tests that actually test implementation capabilities. As long as everybody agrees that's a must-pass test.
So the key question is why deployment based on reference model? And then I deploy on Red Hat and tomorrow on SUSE. Things going to work or they can break. And they guarantee to it because I use the reference model.
That's what we're trying to get to. I can, my team actually does this. One of our project actually deploys Ubuntu in SUSE, and we're actually adding Red Hat. And when we test it, we actually include templates so that people can run the tests themselves and see what passes and breaks. And so you can actually do the same code base will work, but implementation is as much, your choice in implementation is as much a factor as code itself in compatibility of it. And so one of the things that I can tell you is that one person's OpenStack, same distribution, is not another person's OpenStack. Because if they make different configuration choices, it can completely alter the game. The simplest example example is Nova, I'm sorry, the networking. You could use the old style networking versus the new style networking and get completely different APIs and behaviors.
Sure, but that's a virtual. That's like the easy old stuff.
They're both compatible, but yeah, it is. It's definitely a challenge.
Even PHP available to provide at least some things that we have that issue with E versions. You would expect that everybody is using a reference version. You should be able to move around.
So I want to answer your question, Carol, because I don't think we're there yet. But the purpose of driving this type of methodology is to get it. So I wish we could. Sometimes I think our aspirations are one of the biggest challenges. We've accomplished a lot. And in the community, we still feel like we're gaps. And that's one of the places where we're gaps. Questions?
Do you see I have two questions. What is sort of the mission statement of the OpenStack Foundation?
That's a great question. There is actually a very concrete mission statement. I wish I had it off the top of my tongue. But it's basically to build a shared infrastructure for as a service capability. So try to define it without using the cloud. That's important. But what we're really doing is creating a shared, common open reference implementation that people can use to run as a service applications. I think there's nuances and there's goals that people have that are broader. And I think there's definitely tension between some people would throw in innovative, fast moving, some words like that, and there's definitely some people who are feeling very overwhelmed by the pace of change in OpenStack. And I hear from them saying, I wish you guys would just be a core thing that I knew I could use, and I could start ignoring some of these other projects.
What other foundation do you consider like the OpenStack Foundation? When you guys were putting together the foundation, what did you model it on? It's certainly not like the Apache Foundation. It's certainly not like the Linux Foundation, the Pro Foundation, the Python Foundation.
That's a good question. You know, I wasn't that engaged in the actual drawing of papers, so I couldn't tell you what we actually thought of when they did that. And I don't think it was that intentional. You know, in a way, I wish we'd gone back and said, oh, we want to do like the Apache Foundation, we want to do like the Linux Foundation.
Because I don't know any other foundations other than, say, OASIS Group, some group that is more of a standards and protocol body rather than a foundation of, where Apache is a very big umbrella and the Linux Foundation is very narrow than the Linux.
I would say it's closer to what the Linux Foundation is set to do, and one of the reasons I know this is there are a lot of Ubuntu's frameworks have been very influential in how OpenStack operates, in technical committees, to the way summits are operated, and things like that. One of the things that is an interesting twist for OpenStack is that there's no doubt that it's commercial. It's a collection of commercial entities. And so I think that it's a little bit different from a historical perspective of how Apache is grown up, or from how even Linux Foundation is grown up. Because it really started from this commercial coalition very quickly. And that's an interesting question. I don't know if I'm giving you a very clear answer to that one.
I heard that what Linux is for open source, that's what for OpenStack is for cloud-based.
There are definitely people who like to say that, and they like to compare core to kernel and the sort of incubated integrated projects to user space. I definitely hear that analogy a fair bit. It's not one of my favorite analogies what OpenStack is. And it's funny because in the board, you'll get somebody saying exactly that, and there'll be half the room will be like burning and rolling their eyes, and giving pushback on it. And I'm usually in that side. I think that in my experience with cloud is a much more interconnected service capability, and I think that looking at it, some of the things that analogy gives you is very constrictive. Because when I look at OpenStack, my job is to deploy OpenStack, operationalize. It's really deeply interconnected. Right? And you must deal with this spaghetti mess of interconnected things to make OpenStack successful. And I feel like that analogy doesn't translate very well to how a kernel works, because I think the kernel is much more contained. It doesn't have all of the externalities that drive OpenStack to be successful. I don't know what a good analogy besides spaghetti is.
Feels like OpenStack is going through what Unix went through, where all these companies started working it, changing it, whatever. And then Unix made the system be standard.
I really hope we avoid the 20 flavors of OpenStack and right. And that is, we're really trying to avoid that as a possible outcome. It's very, in my opinion, very.
Is there a popular de facto that even though it's not standard, but people use more OpenStack deployments by X vendor?
No. Ubuntu was definitely the clear lead because they were very tightly coupled in the original releases. My team debates why that was a fair bit, but you'll see that there's still a lot of enthusiasm around Red Hat entering the fray. So it's been in there for a long time. You can see that. Red Hat actually Rackspace produced its own distribution for a while. Our first deployments used Rackspace's distribution. We haven't seen that. Luckily, all of the distributions really track back to Trump very nicely, and been good about finding plugin spaces and things like that. So people who didn't know much about OpenStack, do you feel like explaining it? What is something that just doesn't make sense to you? Sorry? Definitely not.
Maybe the reputation for OpenStack exactly, and as an outsider, figure out how to sell that. Why we do something like this is not just go to the drawer, all the different options that we have, and try to collect use it. So basically, speaking of attaching this OpenStack, how's that, and how to see it, yes, what does it do, Windows centric environment. Just trying to solve that. Why this extra piece of work actually is.
One of the things, OpenStack's not for everybody. I think we're on a growth path where we are having increasing interest in a broader and broader audience. Right? The clear target for OpenStack initially is help bring workloads off of non-public cloud. I would say based on their claims to not be threatened, that VMware is threatened using their denials as a proof point. But a lot of what we want in OpenStack, and the reason why we're really interested in it, is that it's a collaborative open project that allows a lot of transparency, control, innovation, new capabilities coming online, and then ultimately I hope that we'll be able to have really portability between clouds. So
I was suggesting that I would follow on top of the PayPal is part of it.
there's definitely, we're seeing people setting up clouds to get off, using OpenStack to get off Amazon. There's a feeling that OpenStack, I believe this very strongly when I first got involved, the thing that was exciting was the scale, the architecture was much better designed to scale. My job, it occurs to me, what we call hyperscale data centers, so 1,000 plus nodes and implementations. But the group I was originally founded out of sold the fourth largest server provider in the world, and we only had, inside of Dell, we were the fourth largest provider. Worldwide, our group sold four, if you took it outside of Dell. We only had 15 customers. So it tells you where the server buys are going, things like that. So I got to see the inside of a lot of scale data centers. Really
We have one, so 600.
okay. Yep. So you're starting to hit those challenges. Yeah, the Windows shop customer.
No. This is our Unix 7
And so what people see in OpenStack is they see the ability to have scale out architecture. But most importantly, one there where they actually can get inside the code, they can contribute, they can make a difference in it. We're starting to see a growing body of people who want to consume OpenStack as an alternative to other market options without becoming part of it. And that's the maturity inflection point. It's now we're back to one of the questions, I think one of the underlying things here, which is who do I go to ask for help from OpenStack? Right? If I buy it, that's part of the distribution question. So if I'm a Red Hat shop, Red Hat should be able to support me, Cisco, Ubuntu, get a private company you can contract out to something like Rackspace, right, or Marantis, or dozens of them. We're starting to get enough companies out there to provide support contracts with us. That's part of our goal when we come to community. The cloud stack, I think it's been making a lot, I know it's been making a lot of strides in this, and it's been a broader base. There's still, they still have this history of being a single company. And cloud.com being the sort of the owner of that service. OpenStack, for good or bad, there's no real single owner. There will be contributions to the Rackspace. And I think Rackspace would be proud to tell you for what hasn't been known for a long time. And the purpose of this is to create a place where all these different contributors can have can work these things out. Trying to think back, trying to look so deep into it, to really profit, thinking how much consumption what the stack is. And if you're just looking, I want to turn the volume down on this, I just want to get a cloud. Deploy it, you can definitely just get OpenStack. My team does say, take this ISO and it'll set up an OpenStack cloud for you, and you can use it. Try to make it really easy. Honestly, this conversation is for people who want to sort of peel back the covers and say, is this a healthy community? Are you dealing with issues where there's 20, 40, 300 or 400 member companies at this point trading? Where you have all these interests coming in, how do you make that sustained project that doesn't tear itself to pieces and problems? So that's what this is about. That's what it's really about.
And from a board member's point of view, perhaps with some privy information, how many public services, public cloud services, can you get there running OpenStack? Or how many, or tout that they're running OpenStack, and how many do they need it? Or like a percentage of
I don't.
public organizations, you know, using to serve the public.
So wait, that's different.
Like this cloud revenue by OpenStack versus the ones who are like, yeah, they're using OpenStack and that's happening.
I wish companies were more public about their actual use. I find a lot more, the uptake in government has been higher than I expected, but we find out about it quietly. The industry has been higher than I expected. Frankly, I mean, my opinion on OpenStack, might be funny as a board member, but OpenStack seemed faster adoption than I expected. I actually expected the curve to be a little bit slower than this, but we're finding, you know, we walk around and find interest in OpenStack all over the place. Definitely education, right? Government, commercial, people trying to get off Amazon, a lot of people looking at OpenStack as an alternative to VMware clouds. One of the biggest challenges that they have with that is the models for deploying OpenStack are different than they are for VMware cloud. So it tends to be a different operational experience. People have to be ready for that. From actually people hosting with OpenStack, which is offering as a service, they're not going to hide that plastic piece. It's funny. I mean, we run across people all the time who say that and say, oh yeah, I'm using OpenStack and I use Rust, say we use TripArk, we did deployment, and we had no idea that we did it, downloaded it, in fact. So unfortunately, a little bit the same way, especially with all these distributions, it's very hard for us to collect that information. That's why we do the user survey every 6 months, and why we really try to encourage people to participate in user survey. If they don't, we really have very little way of knowing. And this process has the same challenge, right? The quality of this process is only going to be driven by as much information you get data to help decide which tests are required.
Is there any accountability or enforcement mechanism, or is it pretty much?
Great question. And actually, one of the things I want to point out is this graphic is actually backed by a blog post that has additional details behind each one of these small bullets in here. And one of the details is that. So the hope is that we can do it as an honor system. So that you can use RepStack and do a public test, but that the fact that you can run the test by yourself, if you bought a product, or an OpenStack, say an OpenStack vendor sold you a product that you run the OpenStack for, the reason why you must be able to be self-administered tests is that if you were having trouble with that, you could run a series of tests and smoke them out. And if they weren't in compliance, I would expect it would only take 1 tweet, right, unless these things to do it. So I fully expect that market pressures will enforce that people are honest about whether or not they pass the test.
Since Puppet is a private, using a Puppet number OpenStack, the expectation is to work across multiple operating systems.
There's Puppet projects. We do a lot of Chef. There's Chef projects for it also. Definitely, you want to look at open source DevOps tooling for OpenStack. I don't know of any scale site that doesn't use DevOps tooling to operate. Not all of them share what they do.
NASA's not doing
NASA's not. About a year ago, they made the choice to basically back out. I believe they still use it at scale, but they stopped funding the leadership who were successful, and they felt like they weren't. And you need to remember, Chris Kemp left, right, the Nebula, and the team that was doing all that work for Rackspace, and they went off and were working full time on it. So that's actually got out, which I think is good to see this sort of churn these companies come
one way the news was presented as a negative move and back to your colleagues. So it's kind of difficult to interpret that.
You know, it's interesting. The usage pattern that I see is that a hosted cloud is really a very normal life cycle for new projects. And then when you operate them at scale, you typically bring them back on site. So, you know, I don't but yeah, one of the things about being an exciting project is that people also love to spend things. Is this the end of this? It makes excellent journalism, right? You know, and this is why we try and drive transparency. We try and make things very pragmatic from this perspective. There's some things we don't need a lot of need a lot of community dissent around it. We want to be able to keep people focused on what the real issues are in the project. We'll always have people who are passionate about it, and that's it for us. Sorry to see you on this. I hope this was really helpful. I love the questions. If you have concerns or something comes back to you, feel free to reach out to me, Liz, or something like that. We definitely want to hear what's going on. And the request I have of everybody in the room, right? You're all part of this process now. You know, if you see somebody complaining or saying, "Hey, this doesn't make sense. This was done. And you snuck up on us and did this," please look. No, we're talking about this. It makes sense, right? You don't agree with it, say it. But you know, it's very important to us as a community that not everybody pays attention. We need to be able to say, look, we got a chance to discuss it, and we're trying to be very open about it. So if you see that, please help us build the community up, be part of that. You know, say, I was part of the dialogue, and say that. That's what we really want. I don't talk to this. All right.
First of all, appreciate all of you joining us today for welcoming over from Austin in this session. So a couple of announcements. First and foremost, I want to thank MongoDB again for hosting us as I've been doing the last 7 months. I also want to let you know that the community has been hard at work trying to schedule out the meetups. So we're close to getting, the goal is to have 6 months cycle of meetings scheduled ahead of time. So you guys can know on Meetup exactly when the meetups are and what topic. So we're close to doing that. We've got the next three months all worked out. So in 2 weeks, we'll put this up on the Meetup page by the next few days. In 2 weeks, we'll be having a Meetup here to talk about a company called Hungry. We're talking about neutron networking and SDN. Then in November, someone from Red Hat will be coming in. We'll actually do our hands-on to installing OpenStack in Red Hat. And we'll put up on the Meetup page that you should definitely bring your laptop. The goal is that every single person here by the end of the Meetup have an OpenStack cloud running on the laptop. And then in December, SolidFire, John Griffith will be coming to talk about the Cinder project. So, and we've got 3 more vendors lining up in January, February, March. So keep looking at the Meetup page. We'll send emails that you know, and all those things we confirm. Thanks again, and we got a few minutes. If you have any questions, Rob, want to stay for a little bit longer?
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I'm Vehicle online, so on Twitter, I go by the name of Vehicle Z.
So myself, Rob, and Judd, who's also on that organizing committee, happy to answer any questions you have about the user group or about OpenStack.